Helen Clark was an early childhood education teacher at one of the finest and most respected schools in Portland, Maine. At 42 years old, the single childless teacher dedicated her life and efforts to caring for and protecting all of her students. They were her family, and she protected them like a mother who must ensure that all her children grow up strong and prepared for the difficulties of adult life. In the community, Helen was well-liked and respected by everyone, especially by the families of her students. Everyone complimented the teacher for the way she cared for and educated the children. She always knew how to make them happy and bring out the best of their smiles, even on those days when it seems impossible to smile. Helen made it possible with her endless love and empathy. What she did not imagine was that it would be her protective instinct that would soon lead her to get involved in a big problem with one of her most beloved students, Nadine. Nadine Wilson was Professor Clark's right eye. To her, all children were equal and equally deserving of her attention and affection, but she couldn't help but feel more affection for some than others, and Nadine had stolen her heart from the first moment she met her. You could say that for Helen, Nadine was the daughter she never had. She was a smart, sweet, and funny child. She was always smiling and managed to spread her joy to all her classmates, who saw her as a leader they should not shy away from. The light that emanated from her young spirit was so strong that no teacher could miss her, and was infected by her smiles. Helen knew this, and so she set out to help and protect her in every way she could to make sure she was always well and grew up happy and oblivious to the problems of the real world. But little Nadine already had real-world problems, and very big ones, although no one was aware of them. Still, Helen knew as much about the girl's life as the other teachers and staff at the school. Her mother had died under strange circumstances that her stepfather, Jonas, would not reveal on the day he enrolled the girl in the school. The whereabouts and identity of Nadine's biological father was also a mystery. The school only knew that since the girl was 4 years old, at which time her mother died, she began living with her stepfather Jonas in a small house in the suburbs. Their life was modest, without great luxuries, but they had enough to live and have a good life. Jonas was a carpenter and had his own cabinet-making shop, which was doing quite well, despite the great financial crises of the last few years and the COVID pandemic. Nadine seemed to be very happy at his side and never showed any signs of trouble at home. The social service agents who interviewed the stepfather saw no objection to him becoming the child's legal guardian and considered him a competent person to raise the girl and give her a good life. And so it went, until one day something strange happened and set off all the alarms among the school teachers. It all started on a rainy Tuesday morning when Nadine was late for school. It was the first time that the girl was late, and that made her teacher feel strange, but she decided not to make a big deal out of it. However, the next day, the same thing happened again. For several days, the girl was almost an hour late for class, and when she arrived, she always seemed to be exhausted and had a bad face. It seemed as if the girl was not sleeping at night, because with each passing day her face was paler and with dark circles under her eyes. Something very unusual for children of her age. Helen started to worry and decided to ask the stepfather what was going on, but the answer she got was not what she expected. Lately, it's been harder for her to wake up, and I'm not sleeping well either. I don't know. These things happen, right? Kids grow and change. It's not that bad. I guess in a few weeks, she'll grow out of it. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Professor Clark. Jonas answered in a cutting tone that the teacher interpreted as a sign that things were not going well. Jonas had never been a very talkative person, nor did he usually interact with the rest of the parents at school, But he was a polite man, and whenever they had spoken, he had always been polite and correct with her. That day he seemed to be angry, and the way he spoke to her seemed strange. He gave the impression that he wanted to end the conversation as soon as possible and get out of there running. Over the next few weeks, things did not improve. Nadine began to arrive on time to class, but her appearance had deteriorated, as had her mood and attitude in class and with the other children. The girl had always been very participative in class and never left her homework undone, but for a few weeks now, she seemed to be somewhere else and never answered correctly to the questions her teacher asked her. "Nadine, my dear, did you hear what I just asked you? Can you answer me?" "What is the capital of Germany?" asked Helen once. Nadine was startled to hear the teacher's voice pronouncing her name, as if she had fallen asleep with her eyes open. I don't know, teacher. Can you repeat the question?" "I didn't hear it right," answered the girl in a weak, slurred voice. At recess time, things also began to change. Nadine always played with the other children, and was the most talkative in the class. All the children laughed at the things she said. She was the life of the party. Until one day, she stopped playing and talking. In the last few days, Nadine spent the recess hours alone, sitting on a secluded bench and staring blankly as she chewed her peanut butter sandwich. She had a sad look in her eyes and had stopped smiling. She was no longer the cheerful and sweet girl everyone knew. But no one knew what had happened to her, nor what were the reasons why a girl so full of life and joy had changed her attitude in such a way. Helen felt her heart break every time she looked at her and saw her sad eyes. She missed her energy, the sound of her laughter in class, and her way of making everything around her come alive and optimistic. One day, she decided to intervene and approached her to ask her what was going on and if she could help her in any way. "Nadine, honey, what's wrong? You're not like that. You like to play with the other kids, and you're always smiling and looking for ways to get the others to do it. Why are you here alone? Is there a problem at home or with one of your classmates? Are you feeling sick? We can help you here, whatever you need. You know that," Helen told her, very worried. The girl avoided looking her in the eye and shook her head. "Everything is fine, teacher. I just feel a little more tired, but it's nothing serious. At home, everything is perfect. Thank you very much for your concern," answered Nadine with a serious gesture. Nadine's response and her evasive attitude only made Helen more worried and confirmed to her that something bad was happening at the girls' house, although she had no idea how she was going to find out. The teacher decided to continue to keep a close eye on her without her being aware of it, while she thought about how to act and seek help, if necessary. Since that first approach, Nadine did not show any sign of improvement in her behavior, but neither did she show any new symptoms that could make them believe that the girl was worse or in danger. She was late to class several days a week, especially when it was very cold or raining. She was quiet in class and at recess. She did not participate in any school activities or planned field trips. Her academic grades began to worsen drastically, and she never smiled anymore. But that wasn't the most worrisome thing of all. Helen began to notice that Nadine was losing weight. At first, it was barely noticeable, but as the weeks went by, it became clear that the girl had lost weight and was looking much worse for the wear. Noticing this, Helen again tried to talk to Nadine during one of the breaks between classes. This time, the child's attitude was very different. "Nadine, is everything all right at home? If you need help, let me know. The school has resources for families who are having a hard time, but I need you to tell me what's going on." "You have nothing to be ashamed of, honey," the teacher pleaded. Nadine kept silent, and her eyes downcast. It was evident that the girl was in pain and was struggling to keep a big secret that was eating her up inside, little by little. Finally, she looked up, and with glazed eyes, she said to her teacher, "Please, Professor Helen, don't ask me any more questions. I don't like to tell lies." And she ran away with tears in her eyes. Helen froze as she watched the 8-year-old girl run away and get lost among the other children. She didn't know what to do or what to say in the face of the girl's unexpected sincerity. The next day, Nadine did not return to class. Helen knew that the girl's absence was related to their last conversation and felt guilty, so she tried to make things right and called Nadine's house to find out why she had not attended class that day. On the other end of the phone, Helen could hear the low, husky voice of the girl's stepfather. "Again, you. Nadine didn't go to school because her teeth hurt. I've taken her to the dentist, and now she's resting. That's why she didn't go to school. She'll be back as soon as she's better. Understand?" Jonas growled at her, more unpleasant than ever. Helen remained silent in the face of Nadine's stepfather's aggressive attitude. She was about to answer him and say goodbye when suddenly she heard something that would take her breath away. "Please, Dad, don't tell any more lies. Tell her the truth, please," cried a voice. It was Nadine's voice. Helen was about to say something, but the call was quickly cut off. The stepfather had hung up the phone to avoid having to explain himself further, but the teacher had already heard what she needed to know, that her favorite student was in serious trouble. The next day, Nadine didn't return to school either, and Helen decided to take advantage of her absence to start drawing up a plan to help. She went to the office of the school principal, Mr. Oliver Rowland, and told him the whole story, including the last phone call to Nadine's house and what she heard the girl say. The director was very concerned with what the teacher explained and agreed on the need to keep watching the girl very closely in order to act at the right moment. "We can't be too hasty, teacher. I understand your concern, and from what you tell me, you have reason to be, but our obligation is to protect the children. We must act with caution and only intervene when we really have clear evidence. If we rush, we could endanger the child, and that's the last thing we want." "Do you understand me?" said the director, very concerned. "You are quite right. I will remain very attentive, and as soon as there is any change, I will let you know. I promise you that I will be prudent. The safety and well-being of this child is my top priority," Helen assured him. The teacher waited patiently for the girl to return to school and go back to her usual routine. Then, without Nadine's awareness, Helen watched her closely. She watched as Jonas brought her to the school gate each morning and then picked her up and took her away. Helen remembered seeing Jonas drive a red van. It was his business van and had the cabinet shop logo stamped on one of the doors, but in recent weeks there had been no sign of the car. That was very strange to Helen, although she didn't see how the car could be related to everything else, so she decided to forget about it and continue investigating. A few days later, the moment the teacher and the school principal had been waiting for came sooner than expected, but in a truly unexpected way that made everyone hold their breath for a few minutes and fear for little Nadine's life. It was Wednesday, and it had been snowing all day. Nadine had maintained her usual aloof attitude and still looked very bad. She was also still refusing to talk to her teacher about whatever was bothering her, so Helen just watched her and waited. It was her way of protecting her and making sure that as long as the girl was under her responsibility, she was safe and happy. But Helen was a teacher and had to fulfill her obligations to the other children, so she couldn't always control what Nadine was doing. No one can be in two places at the same time, And while the teacher was attending to her 5-year-old students, something unexpected happened. Nadine and the rest of the children in her class were in the gymnasium. The snow was falling steadily, and the temperatures were very cold, forcing the teacher to hold the class indoors. That day, they would play team volleyball. Nadine was an excellent player, at least she used to be, and all the kids wanted to team up with her. However, the girl didn't seem very animated and reluctantly agreed to play. They had only been playing for 20 minutes when Nadine began to feel unwell. The girl seemed dizzy and was as pale as snow. The teacher noticed and asked her if she wanted to sit down to rest, but the girl shook her head and continued playing. She went back and forth across the court, tripping over her teammates, and every ball she got ended up on the floor. The girl's feeling of dizziness increased until she suddenly collapsed. "Professor, help! Nadine has fainted. She is not breathing," shouted the children, approaching their companion. The teacher alerted the other teachers of what had happened and helped the girl himself. He had medical training, and after examining Nadine, he deduced that it was a case of dizziness due to lack of sugar. After several minutes, Nadine seemed to come to and opened her eyes. Her face was white and sweaty, but otherwise she appeared healthy. "You've had a sugar crash, Nadine. Come with me. You just need to drink and eat something, and you'll feel better," said the professor, helping her up. As soon as the news of the fainting reached Helen's ears, the teacher panicked and rushed to check on the girl. When she arrived, Nadine was eating some chocolate and orange juice, still weak but looking much better than a few hours earlier. Seeing her teacher, the girl blushed and looked down. Helen walked over to her and sat down next to her quietly. She didn't want to pressure her or make her feel worse. However, before she could say anything to her, the girl's stepfather burst into the room in a rage and threatened the teachers. "What have you done to my daughter? Nadine, sweetheart, are you all right? Let's go home. I'll take care of you." "Come on!" shouted Jonas, pulling the girl's arm tightly around her. What happened next, no one expected. Nadine did not move from her seat and continued to stare at the floor. Then, instead of looking at her stepfather, she turned her gaze to Helen and said, with tears in her eyes, something the teacher would never forget. "Help me, teacher. I don't want to go home. I don't want to go through the same thing again. Help us, please," whispered the girl. Helen felt her heart sink and became very nervous. Nadine's request took her by surprise. Helen told the stepfather that the girl did not want to go home with him and that he should let her rest. But Jonas was not going to be intimidated and practically dragged the girl out of school. It was then that Helen knew it was time to act and take risks. Without telling anyone what she was going to do, the teacher left the school behind Jonas and the girl and followed them very closely without them noticing. On the way out, she thought she should take the car to follow them, but she saw that Jonas was not going to the school parking lot and that they were still walking on a secondary path around town. She kept a safe distance at all times so as not to be seen, but at no time did she lose sight of them. They walked for more than half an hour, moving farther and farther away from the urban center of the city. Helen did not understand why Jonah was taking the girl that way, if his home was in the other direction. But a few minutes later, she would understand everything and would reveal the secret that Nadine had been trying to hide from everyone for all those weeks. It was getting dark, and the snow was falling heavily on their heads, when Helen saw Jonas and Nadine arrive at a small, ramshackle house by the lake. Jonas opened the door, and after making sure that no one had seen them, closed it with a loud slam that shook the flimsy walls of the house. Helen was shocked, looking around the house in shock and trying to understand what was happening. Panicked, she grabbed her phone and called the school principal to tell him what she had discovered. They both agreed that the best thing to do would be to call the police and let them handle the matter. I know it's difficult, but you can't intervene until the police arrive. For Nadine's sake, don't do anything and wait for reinforcements, the school principal ordered her, very alarmed. Helen promised the director that she would stay hidden until the police arrived. And she did, although as she waited hidden behind a large tree, she felt her heart racing, imagining what little Nadine must be suffering in that ruined house. Luckily, a few minutes later, sirens of several police cars could be heard coming up to where she was standing at full speed. "It's in there! Hurry! There's a little girl in danger!" Helene shouted to the officers. But what the police discovered inside that dilapidated house was not what Helen had imagined. Shortly after entering the house, several police officers came out, accompanied by Jonas and the girl. To their surprise, Jonas was not handcuffed and appeared to be very calm talking to the authorities. Helen did not understand what was going on, but she would soon do. The teacher approached one of the police officers and asked her what they had discovered inside the house. What the woman answered would break her heart into 1,000 pieces. "The only danger that child is in is starving and freezing to death, ma'am. The girl's stepfather is broke and refused to ask for help because he is very proud. The house is in ruins, and they have hardly anything to eat in the refrigerator. The living conditions of this father and stepdaughter are deplorable. I don't know how much longer they could have lasted in these conditions, let alone in this cold," the police officer confessed to her. In Helen's mind, it all began to make sense. The delays at school, the girl's bad appearance and moodiness, and the fainting a few hours earlier. It all fit with what the police had just told her. Nadine was starving and cold because of her stepfather's pride. A really sad and difficult situation to manage that could have been avoided by contacting the right people and asking for help. In the weeks that followed, Jonas and the girl entered a program to help families in poverty. They were provided with an apartment and food, and Jonas was able to find a job as a carpenter's helper thanks to the recommendation of one of the police officers handling his case. For her part, Nadine went back to being the happy, giggly child she had always been, and was deeply grateful to her teacher, who never gave up and fought for her. Do you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.